Evening, everyone. Hello. Just to go over what we're going to go over today now, various people are asking questions. Obviously, the big geopolitical news, of course, is what was an attack on Israel and is now an attack in the occupied Palestinian territories. Where's Phil? I'm here. Hello. And I bring those questions back towards the end, as I always do. We're going to have a topic that we go over here. I want, funny enough, talk about domestic politics rather. I will just point out one thing, but then by all means bring these questions back in later in the stream. Someone has just said, why has Starmer condoned Israel breaking international law? He hasn't. I will grant you the statement he made, was a bit ham-fisted, I thought. But if you actually listen to what he said, he was very clear within international law. Those were his words. So he hasn't. But we're going to have a little talk about, and I am going to do a video again on this situation tomorrow. But, as people will understand, this channel, I have various interests, even politically, but I don't bring them all to the channel because, the way a YouTube channel works is you're trying to get a collective of people together who are interested in a thing. I cover Westminster politics, right? So British politics, particular emphasis on Westminster. Sometimes it strays a little bit further away, but mostly it has to be around that. So what I'm going to have a little talk about today. There's a few things to bring up potentially. But first of all, I just want to highlight where we have our own problems in this country when it comes to people who should be keeping us safe and are not. Because the Met Police, so this photo, for those who aren't aware, that's behind me, is at Conservative Party headquarters. It's a Christmas party, 2020, where there was lockdown in effect. And the rules at the time were that you could not have any gathering of people of different households unless it was reasonably necessary for work. You certainly could not have gatherings of people of different households, specifically for social events. Now, the Met Police, I'm sorry, can someone say in the chat, if you've not got sound, there is sound. I've had this before sometimes. It will be, you use a different, can someone just say to use a different browser or something? But the Met Police saw this photo, which includes, just to point out, it includes a few people who were honoured by Boris Johnson. It includes, you can see someone stood up in a grey jacket raising a glass. Behind him is Sean Bailey. He's gone to the House of Lords now. He was the Conservative Party's candidate for London Mayor in the last mayoral election, right? A man who, to be fair to him, is a great deal more sane than their current candidate. So he was there. There was a few other notable people there as well who have been honoured in Boris Johnson's resignation honours list. I have to choke on the word honours when I say that about Boris Johnson. The Met Police were shown this photo. It was verified that it was during lockdown. You can quite clearly see a lot of people there with glasses in their hand, clearly posing for a photo there. You can see platters and, things with party food on it. You can see someone wearing a party hat in the background. And the Met Police deemed this to be fine. They said there's no evidence of any law breaking here. So then some video footage was leaked of some of these people dancing and cavorting at the party. Because remember, it doesn't matter that it was a party. I feel I have to keep reminding people, because it's now several years ago and the law's changed quite a lot of times. People talk about, oh, does this look like a party? Well, first of all, this does look like a party. But when they're talking about the Boris Johnson birthday bash in the Cabinet Office, it's like, yeah, it didn't look like a good party, but it didn't have to be a party. The legislation didn't talk about a party. It talked about a gathering. Is it a gathering? Yeah, it's a gathering, so it was illegal. Gatherings were illegal unless they were... sometimes reasonably and at other times strictly necessary for work. This clearly was not. But it's not until the video was presented, and even that was ages ago. That was, I can't remember how long ago, that was months ago. And now the Met Police have decided, oh yeah, we've changed our minds from looking at a photo and going, no, we can't see anything wrong with that, to issuing 24 fixed penalty notices based on the video. And the video had fewer people in it than that, because the video was like a close-up of a few people while they were dancing. There were some other people in other rooms who weren't in the video. They got together, they put themselves together for this photo. The photo was actually a bigger breach of the law than the video, because the photo has people, the purpose for the law was to prevent infection. And this one has them all crammed together. Absolutely insane. But it just, again, highlights for me, I mean, a lot of people will look at this and it highlights two things for it. First of all, that the Conservatives just have no respect for even their own laws. So that the party of law and order doesn't have respect for law and order. This wasn't about just about Boris Johnson. This was Conservative Party headquarters. Boris Johnson wasn't even there. This had nothing to do with Boris Johnson, in fact. In fact, if this was the only lockdown party, you would not even blame Boris Johnson. You'd say, well, there's nothing to do with him. This is a group of other people at Conservative Party headquarters. Johnson would have known nothing about it. It just shows that Conservatives in general just have scant regard for the law. And when I say that, I mean specifically people at the top of the party. I don't mean like ordinary Conservative Party members or supporters or anything like that. Should receive a fine just for the jumper. Oh, no, be fair. You've got to wear crap jumpers at Christmas. It's the law. Actually, is it? I was told it was. That's why I have to wear crap jumpers at Christmas. Johnson's under the table. No, he wasn't actually there. He was having his own little bash at home, wasn't he? But the second thing, again, it highlights is, and I will keep banging on about this, is just how unfit for purpose the Metropolitan Police are. You know, the Metropolitan... First of all, like, there were various stages of compliance with this law breaking. There were police officers stationed outside Downing Street when parties were going on in Downing Street. There will have been constables that were stationed outside phoning it in and being told by their commanders to just ignore it. You know, there were times when the parties spilled out into the Guardian. It was definitely audible. Those police officers will have known parties were going on. I mean, there was a time, wasn't there? It's when they spilled out into the garden, broke Boris Johnson kids, like Wilf, is it? I can't remember the kid's name. He's got two of them now. But broke the kid's swing or garden play thing or something like that and threw up. So it was like, you know, the police were aware these parties were going on Downing Street, did nothing. Then when the evidence emerged that they had gone on and made public, the Met still did nothing. Then Sue Gray collects a load of evidence, hands it over, and they go, all right, we'll have a look. But they only use the evidence that Sue Gray handed over. They don't collect any of their own, which means they don't investigate the ABBA party, which someone mentioned earlier, which was reputedly the most serious breach. And I'm not even sure that the COVID inquiry will cover it, because some people may think, well, will the COVID inquiry cover it? The best, I suspect not, because it's got nothing to do with the COVID inquiry, I don't think. The COVID inquiry isn't about finding examples of criminal behaviour. It's about examining how we prepared for the pandemic, how we carried out pandemic, actions, and what lessons to learn. So I'm not sure, unless it happens to come out in some messages, but those messages could easily be redacted, couldn't they? This looks like the sort of party you need to get drunk to be willing to attend. Do you know what? That's like every party for me, though. I hate parties. When we were at the conference, we did our thing at the Camp and Furnace on Monday. And then afterwards, like, we went to the pub to get something to eat. And then I just went home. Because a load of other people went on to a party. I think it was a Fabian Society party or something. And it's like my idea of hell going to parties. It doesn't really matter. I'll tell you what my problem is with just parties. There's nothing to talk about. Like if you go along to say the Rejoin March, what are you going to talk about? You're going to talk about Brexit and rejoin the EU. Of course you are. There's a group of you together that's there for some purpose. If you go to a work meeting, you know what the agenda is. You've got things to talk about. You know, you get a group of people like we were at the Camp and Furnace. What we're going to talk about? Social media and the fight back against mainstream media misinformation. So again, anyone you talk with, they're all there for that common purpose. You can talk about that. You know, you go to a social party though, and it's like, oh, you know. So you then get boring arseholes talking about the weather or something. It's like, well, no. You know, and I don't know what's worse, having to listen to people talking shit about stuff. Because what they have to do, if they want to talk to me, they're going to have to try and find a topic I'm interested in. Well, good luck with that. I don't know what's worse, having someone try to do that or me just sat in the corner thinking and just sitting there and hoping no one notices me. So I don't go to them. But anyway, please can I discuss Israel and stuff like that later. Don't worry. Although do bear in mind again, you know, on something like that, I did a video last weekend. It doesn't, there isn't anything else to add to it. The only reason I've done a video for tomorrow is because it's like there's ripples now around Britain. So it's very much British news as well as Middle Eastern news. Johnson was having his own little what at home. Well, who knows? Passed out on the sofa again, as usual, isn't he? I mean, you know, as we're finding out now from the COVID inquiry, because the COVID inquiry is now up to the stage of examining decision-making. And that, you know, if I am going to just touch on the Israeli situation at the moment, the Israeli-Palestine situation, it is this. And what makes me as sick as anything is the Tories are loving it, because right now we're getting to the meaty bit of the COVID inquiry. What's on the front page of the newspapers? The latest atrocities in the Middle East. You know. The Tories are loving it. Can I imagine Johnson's missus in charge of government? We don't have to. Apparently, we've seen it. Now, obviously, she won't have been deciding every little thing. But, you know, those messages speaking of the fact that Carrie Simmons was driving a lot of policy, it doesn't matter that she wasn't actually giving out all the orders and deciding everything. She was deciding some things. Boris Johnson was deciding some things. Dominic Cummings was deciding some things. Goodness knows how many other people who should have not really been that involved in the process were deciding, and that includes Boris Johnson. Yes, Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister, but he never should have been bloody Prime Minister. You know, all of these people were deciding some things because Boris Johnson cannot be asked to do his job properly. This man that feels aggrieved that he is no longer the Prime Minister, that thinks he should have been Prime Minister for like a decade or more, couldn't be asked to do the job. It's very much like David Cameron. When David Cameron was Prime Minister, and like Prime Minister's a proper full-time job. It's like constantly on. And yet he would insist on having his date nights with his wife. And it's like, in a normal circumstance, you can think, oh, you know, it's nice, you know, making sure he puts some time aside for his wife each week and stuff like that. And ordinarily, you think, well, that's right. And in any other job, you should be able to have the time to do that. But he's the Prime Minister. You know, there's a service element to it. We expect that service. If you don't want it, no one's forcing you to do it. And it's not like the people, there are people who have to do jobs that they'd really rather not do, and it's like, it's no good saying to them, well, why you do it? They have to do it for the money. No one has to be Prime Minister for the money. Anyone who can become Prime Minister has enough money, you know, or their income is high enough. Apart from anything else, they're an MP at least. So they don't need to become Prime Minister for the money to pay the bills. So they're choosing to do it. And I always said when David Cameron was Prime Minister, it seemed to me that he never really wanted to be Prime Minister. It's like he had this sort of background. He went to Eton, went to university, you know, he became a political advisor. He was like Norman, it was Norman Lamont's political advisor, I think. That's how he cut his teeth and then eventually became an MP and leader and Prime Minister. And it always struck me that he just followed that path, because if you come from that background, you go into politics, it's sort of expected that you should be aiming to become Prime Minister. but he always struck me as someone whose ambition was to become an ex-prime minister. That he was, he wanted to go in, faff about for a bit, and he couldn't wait to leave. Because he never, while he was prime minister, ever seemed to take it seriously either. I mean, he wasn't like as reckless as Johnson, but he really took his eye off the ball on quite a lot of issues. David Cameron once said Nigeria was fantastically corrupt to the Queen with his mic on. Now it would make more sense if the president of Nigeria called the UK fantastically corrupt. Well, quite. Glass houses and all that, isn't it? Glass houses. I mean, in reality, on the global scale of corruption, we're nowhere near the top of it, but nor are we anywhere near the bottom. I think it's fair to say. Compared to most police forces in the UK, the Met Police should not be under the jurisdiction of the UK government, but the Mayor of London. Well, it's a funny one, isn't it? Because they're not. They're not at all. Like Sadiq Khan gets, they're trying to give him a lot of stick for like the murder rate in London, even though the murder rate's like no higher than it was when it was under Boris Johnson. But again, what? Let's say it were. What would he do about it? Like, I mean, the murder rate's higher than it was in 2020, but there's a reason for that. 2020, there was like, I mean, it's quite difficult to murder. I know a lot of murders can be like people you know, but you weren't allowed to see people you know unless you were living with them. So that sort of reduced the amount of crime, violent and otherwise. But what was he supposed to do about it? He can't do anything. All he can do, he can call senior police officers to meetings, and he can say, "What's all this about?" But he can't impose anything on them. If he's really upset, he can express his lack of confidence in the Met Police Commissioner, which generally has the effect of causing them to resign, but he can't choose their replacement. So yeah, it's but in my view, the Met Police should now not exist. I cannot see any way of reform. I keep saying I can't see any way of reforming it. It should actually just be just have normal police force in London, or some people say normal police forces. I'm not a fan of loads of police forces, but whatever. I don't claim to be an expert. But separate, like, the reason why the Met is very different to other police forces is because they also have a lot of specialist units attached to them, like serious crime units. Separate those out. They would fit much better with the National Crime Agency. Filter them out, send them off to the NCA, and just have an ordinary police force in London, just like you would like in. I have Humberside Police here. You've got South Yorkshire Police just a bit further north of me. Just have like London Police, a normal community police force. Just have that. But anyway, David saying that on one of the days they parted, I was unable to attend my wife's grandmother's funeral due to restrictions. I'll always hate the Tories for that. I mean, the thing is, and I'll keep saying this, the people who observed those restrictions, they weren't wrong. Boris Johnson, when he got caught out, tried to make out that you were an idiot for observing those restrictions. You weren't. He just had no respect for the country or for anything by refusing to follow those restrictions himself. But that was the mark of the man. When he got caught, rather than accept that he'd done wrong, he tried to then turn it into, oh no, you were following the rules too strictly. No. People weren't. There were very good reasons. But the thing is, a lot of those restrictions also shouldn't have been necessary. We had those restrictions in place for more regularly and longer than we needed to, because our government took the situation, so the opposite of seriously. What is the opposite of seriously? Doesn't make sense to say recklessly, but I don't know what I'm thinking there. There's a slightly different one here. When Starmer told Sky that Labour plans to grow the country's way out of the public funding shortfalls, but means he might be forced to turn to tax rises, who's going to shoulder that burden? Right, okay, I haven't seen that. I'd be very surprised if Starmer actually said tax rises. First of all, there is no need. And the thing is, Labour would be mad to even hint at tax rises, because then people will be thinking, oh, that means my income tax. No, it won't. They are going to attract more tax because they're going to remove some tax breaks. So the trick, like, if you think about it, at the moment, there's a lot of people. We have, governments have a budget of what, about between seven. Oh, what was? Let me have a look at the total budget. Somewhere between £700 and £900 billion. It will have been. I'll do. Actually, I might be able to do. We've got a budget set for this year. Oh no, it's way more than that. Of course, inflation. I'm not taking inflation into account. I know. So the UK's public sector will, in 2023, 2024, so from April to April, £1.2 trillion. Think about this. There's a good 200 to 250 billion pounds in tax that isn't collected because people. And that's not tax avoidance. That's not legal schemes. I'm not including tax breaks in that. I mean actual fraud, tax fraud. There's about 2 to 250 billion pounds worth of tax fraud in the UK each year. Now, we'll never get all of that or even the bulk of it, but you get a sizable amount of that, and all of a sudden you're looking at a good chunk of it. And then you remove some tax breaks where they're not needed. You get a good chunk more. And also, now it's worth just pointing something out here. Let me put this up. These are the latest voting intention results from YouGov. But in the details, they asked a few other interesting questions. And if we look at this one down here, I may have to read it out to you. It says, when it comes to government investment in infrastructure and housing, which of the following best reflects your view? Now, remember, Labour have they have flip-flopped a bit on when it comes to borrowing. So remember, Labour had this flagship programme of £28 billion green investment a year. Then it was like, oh, the economy, Liz Truss really did a number on the economy. We might not be able to do that from the first year. We may have to build up to it because Labour felt that they had to promise no extra borrowing. Then, more recently, this month, in fact, at the conference, Rachel Reeves is now saying that a bit of borrowing for investment is fine. So why the change of position? It'll be reflecting what the public think. If we look at this view here, and this was a new poll, so we can't see what the last results were because it's the first time YouGov have asked this. So when it comes to government investment in infrastructure and housing, which of the following best reflects your view? The UK government should invest more in infrastructure and housing, even if this means increasing government borrowing, 43%. Of those who think we should reduce the amount of money it borrows, even if this means reducing investment in housing infrastructure, just 21%. Now, 16% say neither. It could be 16% are happy with the current level of borrowing and or investment. But even if you put them together, you get 37 to 43. So there's a plurality, I hate that word, of people who actually say, yes, borrowing is fine for investment. Obviously, what matters is what the target voters think. But the fact that Rachel Reeves is now going, yeah, actually, borrowing for investment is, on a certain level, she's not like going mad, will be fine, suggests that Labour think their target voters are okay with it. Josiah saying Labour seem to be putting a lot of emphasis on simply avoiding the amount of waste the Tories have been creating. The idea of efficiency it's a long one in politics. It's been around as long as I've known. When I was growing up with Yes Minister, it was always a big thing, for example. So here's the usual thing. So every government, Tory governments do this all the time. It's all they do. Is they will sort of say to you, because what will happen, right, this is what's happened because we've already been through this. So Labour invested, our public services got a lot better. Yes, some of us may think there were things they could have done better still, but they got a lot better. Our public services were essentially working pretty well. There was still work to do. So then the Tories come along. They've rescued their reputation from when they were kicked out. They've got a whole new front bench, or a largely new front bench. We say Ken Clark was still there and William Hague, but largely new. And they now say, right, well, we can deliver all of this at a lower cost. Now, ordinarily, you go to someone saying, right, we can provide you the same service at lower cost. You are suspicious, right? So how do they con voters that they can cut your taxes and still deliver the same services? They say efficiencies, isn't it? Labour do it inefficiently. Lots of waste. Don't need it. Don't need it. We'll get rid of the waste. And Labour can actually genuinely say that without lying, without conning. Because, I mean, look at the amount of waste right now. Look at all this money. Like, you know, the Bibi Stockholm barge, for example, or the Rwanda scheme, all the money we're shelling out for these things that do nothing. That is waste. That is very genuinely waste. Then you look at all the money that's going on public contracts where we're spending more than we should be doing. That is waste. HS2, you know, it's actually now going to cost more to even finish the bit that Sunak's promising to finish because he's abandoned the other bit because it's going to be less useful. So, you know, there is a lot of waste that Labour can genuinely cut out on. I just don't want to say how much it would be. But I will say it's a poor argument because it's used all the time. I would rather they focused, even though there is such a thing as waste, I would rather they focused on getting rid of tax breaks for people who don't need it, which they are doing, and where necessary, I mean, borrowing for investment is valid because you get more money back, you pay it off. Whatever you borrow, as long as you're spending it to boost production on some level, you're going to get more back in tax revenues. Invest, basically, you know, for all the talk about, you know, what's needed to grow the economy, Liz Truss thinks tax cuts. No, the way you grow the economy is always investment. It's always investment. It's really this simple. If you invest in better healthcare, then workers recover from injuries and illnesses more quickly. They're back up to full productivity more quickly. If you invest in schools, better training, better skills, then the workers can do the higher skilled work that boosts productivity. You don't just want a load of drones doing the manual work, which, you know, we can automate increasingly these days. You know, you invest in transport and you can move people and goods around the country more quickly. Journey times are a waste. Journey times are not worthwhile to anyone. That's not boosting our GDP. So the quicker you make those journey times, the more productivity you have. All of these things boost the economy. All of these investments boost the economy. So that is how you grow the economy. You invest. The only argument between left and right should be how you invest, not whether you invest. Waste on consultancies fees. Oh my goodness, yeah. Gordon Bennett. I mean, yeah, sometimes there is a need. It's not like all consultants. Like sometimes you need someone to come into an organization and just say, look, you know, we need to implement this thing, advisors, or just get someone from the outside to come in and try and observe where, you know, they're getting things wrong. But some of it's absolutely, you know, the COVID, the track and trace consultancies, we were spending what, £1 million a day or something. And what did those consultancies get us? The whole scheme was considered by Parliament, judged by Parliament, to be no better than if we hadn't had one at all. It did nothing. So whatever we were getting from those consultants, it was not advice on how to make it better because it never did get better. But anyway. Recently watched that episode of Yes Minister where a hacker tries to make the civil service more efficient and it bites him on the arse. Yeah, later, yeah, because it ends up more expensive. Well, the thing is, obviously, Yes Minister was a parody, really, but there was a good point made by one of the sort of official character, the Sir Humphrey character, the civil servant, in that if you give the civil service more work to do, you have to employ more civil servants to do that work, and that is true. Like the Brexit at the moment, the government are saying, oh, we need to get our civil service levels down to pre-Brexit levels. It's like, oh, yeah, we had to boost the civil service to deal with Brexit, but now that we've done it, we need to reduce it. It's like, no, the work's still there. Brexit means that the civil service now has to do more work. So we need more civil servants, not fewer. We need 50,000 officials just to deal with import checks, which is why we can't do import checks properly at the moment because we don't have them and we're never going to get them. You know, so that is true. If you give the civil service more work, you need more civil servant jobs. But again, it's like, why is that a bad thing? Why is job creation a bad thing? David come back say, I didn't disagree with the COVID restrictions. I do it again for the greater good. Just hate the Tories for the contempt they show the public. Absolutely. And that's what they still don't seem to understand. They don't seem like, the problem is they don't see it as a completely separate issue to normal politics. In normal politics, you do your unpopular stuff in the early stages of the parliamentary cycle. So the idea is, let's say you've got an unpopular policy. You're going to do something unpopular, and you do it in the first or second year of the parliament, right? The idea is that in a few years' time, people have sort of forgotten about it. Let's say it was a good, because sometimes you have to do something unpopular, but it's a good policy. So then what you can say is a couple of years later, well, look, we're getting the benefits of it now. The world didn't fall down, did it? The sky didn't collapse. It's all fine. And people go, oh, yeah, it was. It's fine. So they forget about it, or they come to terms with it, and it works. The problem that the Tories still just fundamentally don't understand about Partygate is the people most hurt by it are those who remember loved ones dying alone. You couldn't be with them. And, or where they couldn't attend the funeral. And it's like, people don't get over that. They don't get over that. They don't forget that. That doesn't blow over. And that's what they fundamentally don't understand. But anyway. Yes, but I've got a poster with this somewhere, actually. Consultancy, if you don't have the solution, there's a lot of money to be made in prolonging the problem. Yes. I used to have these calendars for a few years. How you go on, in most businesses, actually, they've got these motivational posters on the wall, full of shit. There was these demotivational posters, and that was on one of them. But yeah. One of my favourites was in a sea of trouble, there's always an island of opportunity, but miss that and you're pretty much boned. Derek saying, I often get paid to work as a consultant, currently for government agencies, but I'm an expert. Civil service is so underfunded and pay rates are so low they can't employ the experts they need now. Now, like I said, you do sometimes need someone to come in from the outside and say, look, what we're doing, how can we improve it? But when you've got people that are just constantly on, it's like going on for months. It's like, well, what's taking months, and why aren't we seeing improvements? Where did the £400 for every man, woman, and child in the UK spent on track and trace system go? I mean, really, where? Where indeed? Because the people on the phone with their 2-page PDF training were on minimum wage. It is quite reasonable. There was a fair amount of money obviously spent on testing. That will have accounted for some. I went to a mobile test site one time, so there was the testing laid on. So there was some money actually spent on something. It's just, the problem was, again, where did the bulk of it go? That'll be interesting to know. I wonder, the COVID inquiry, I would think, I don't know how wide-ranging it is. I would think it will have to look at that, because one of the recommendations surely has to be on value for money. But at the moment, politically, what is really going to be interesting is when they get to the Eat Out to Help Out, because Rishi Sunak's personally in the frame for that. And that'll have to be part of the next couple of months' investigation, because they're looking at that decision-making, that senior decision-making. And Eat Out to Help Out, even at the time, was obviously a very bad idea, an incredibly bad idea. We've had, I don't know whether people have seen it. The Guardian were reporting on what Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, was saying about the dysfunctional nature of government ahead of the second lockdown. I did the video today more on this idea of sort of, the too many cooks type thing. But there was, the second lockdown was massively delayed. And in actual fact, its necessity was largely down to Rishi Sunak. It was really obvious that this Eat Out to Help Out was not helping anyone. And the thing is as well, the scheme, because it was billed as, restaurants have had a tough time, we're going to help them out. It's like, okay, that's fine. Takeaways were excluded from it. Now, the best way you could help out a restaurant would be to buy takeaway and go and eat it at home. So you're not actually in the restaurant infecting loads of others. That was excluded from the scheme. You had to go. It's like you were being financially incentivized to infect others. It's like, that's why it was like, described as eat out to help the virus out. Because that's exactly what it was doing at the time. Is it likely the Lords will be disbanded after the Senate elections to capitalise on the discussion around PR, seeing as the second chamber's electoral model still hasn't been announced? So yeah, that's an interesting one. So there's various dates coming up in terms of electoral reform. You're right, we don't yet know what the details of Starmer's plan to reform the House of Lords, by which he means axe it completely. In fact, he's gone very quiet on it. I'm expecting that is to avoid having lots of distractions rather than because he's gone cool on the idea, although it won't be easy. But in terms of PR, it's going to be my little bunny. Yes, the Senate is the next Senate elections, that's the Welsh Parliament elections, those who don't know, is going to be in 2026, and that is going to be using full proportional representation. That inevitably generates a nice, handy little debate on PR. And then, a couple of years later, I think I'm right in saying it'll be the centenary of women getting the vote. So basically universal suffrage in this country. So that will also spark it. And I know there's campaigns gearing up for things like that to try and capitalise on public debate on the... Because I think where a lot of like conservatives, because the name... as the name suggests, will try and get you. It's like, oh, we don't need to change the voting system. Don't need to change the voting system. It's good to point out to people, actually, we change our voting system all the time. Wales are changing their voting system. We've changed our voting system loads. We've had parliamentary democracy of a sort in this country for centuries, but it wasn't real democracy, was it? It was. It began with there was a few people who could vote. To begin with, you had to own land to be able to vote. So it was only men who owned land. And then it was sort of like more men and then more men and then women. So it changed a lot. But anyway, right, let's go into some other comments. Matthew's popped one back up here. Let's go on to the Israel-Palestine. Although I will also welcome questions from other ones. So Starmer's ill-judged comments on Israel being made headlines this week, not his conference speech. His stance has not pleased both sides. So first of all, what I will say is, that's not true. His conference speech was bigger news. I don't know which news you're looking at. Second of all, so in terms, I would say within Labour, there have been 4 senior members of the leadership who have been speaking about the situation in Israel and the occupied territories. You've had Keir Starmer, Emily Thornberry, David Lammy, Lisa Nandy. David Lammy, Lisa Nandy, they've been getting their messaging dead right. They're fine. Emily Thornberry made a bit of a mess, but possibly that was because they were trying to be very, very tentative about the situation. I want people to try and bear this in mind. I don't know whether people have considered this. Just in the historical context. Remember why Israel exists in the first place. Because there was no great call for the Jewish state 100 years ago. There were like some people calling for it, but they were on the level of like Karl Marx calling for communism. There was no great appetite for it, right? Then what happened is we had a little bit of a situation in Europe, didn't we? In the 1930s and 40s. We had the Holocaust. And all of a sudden, then you've got Jewish communities around the world all integrating into countries, in various countries around the world, feeling, yeah, this is great, this is fine. All of a sudden feeling, we're not safe. Because they were attacked for being Jews, right? And that anti-Semitism is around the world. It wasn't just Hitler. It wasn't just the Nazis. That anti-Semitism, there's pockets of it all around the world. So inevitably thought the only way we can be safe is to have our own Jewish state. So that is what was indeed set up. Obviously, the initial aims of it were then completely subverted because of various wars, bouts of violence and all the rest of it. So it's ended up in a right mess where it is now. But try and consider this. Last weekend, you had mass murder of Jewish people for being Jewish. It wasn't just they happened to be Jewish. It was specifically because they're Jewish. And it was the greatest number of anti-Semitic murders since the Holocaust. So you need to consider it in that context. Phil's saying that no discussion around PR. Starmer specifically ruled it out. No, he hasn't. He has never ruled it out at all. He has said it's not a priority. That is always his statement, and it was his statement last week as well. Or it's not a priority. That's not ruling it out. And also bear this in mind. He's ruled out entry to the single market. You come back to me in 6 years and say that. You tell me in 6 years' time he ruled out joining the single market. But anyway, carrying on with this one. So going back to this, I just feel I have to add I think it's one of these subjects where you have to try and add some context. You know what I mean? Which is why at the moment my video on it tomorrow is very long. I need to try and cut it down. So Starmer's ill-judged comments on Israel have been the main headlines. Well, it hasn't, but were they ill-judged? I think so, yes. And I'll tell you why. And I'll say this, I'm going to say this in my video tomorrow. This bit's not getting cut. From a politician's point of view, how do you approach the Israel-Palestine situation? Bearing in mind, no politician in the UK can do anything about it. Not like, although I'll criticise Rishi Sunak for his position as well, there's nothing he can actually do about it. It's all show, it's all window dressing, anything he says, he can do nothing. Even the American president can do nothing. But at the same time, it's still right to you still want to get the wording right. It's really this simple. You defend Israel's right to defend itself. That includes, remember, this isn't about, so what's going on in Gaza right now, let us be honest, it's not even a revenge attack. Some people are saying it's a revenge attack. It's not. Netanyahu wants to basically wipe out the Palestinians just like Hamas want to wipe out Israel, right? And that's his justification. Like all these people, this is where whataboutery gets you. All the people saying with Hamas's attack, yeah, but what about? Well, people are doing that with Israel now. Yeah, you're moaning about it, but what about last week? You know, whataboutery just gets you more murder. So what's happening there is you've got, sorry, I've forgotten the thing now. I've forgotten my complete train. Yeah, so what a politician should say is Israel has a right to defend itself. And that includes, remember, it's not just that people were murdered in Israel, they were taken hostage. So there's hostages in Gaza. So of course Israeli troops have got the right to go into Gaza and try to recover them, recover bodies if they're dead and rescue them if they're still alive. Of course they've got the right to do that. But at the same time, that within international law has to be in there. And it was in there from Starmer. Now, where I think he went wrong is he got too specific. So he was asked specifically, is there justification for cutting off water and electricity? And he said there was. He did say within international law. Now, here's where I have a problem. I have two problems, actually. The first is, I'm not sure how cutting off water and electricity is a valid way of getting your people back, because that's all it's supposed to be about, getting your people back. Sure, if you can arrest some Hamas terrorists, okay, grand. But how does cutting off water and electricity do that? That's not been explained to me. But the biggest problem I have with it is you don't have to talk about specifics. No one's going to make you talk about specifics. All you have to do is say, Israel has a right to defend itself. It has a right to try and rescue its citizens within international law. Now, Starmer did say the within international law. The problem I have is not, it's the bit he said before it, because it's like, you're saying cutting off electricity and water within international law. Why didn't you just say within international law? So, clumsy, but, you know, like there's nothing really wrong with the general thrust of it. Phil says, ruled it out in the first term. Well, we know he's ruled it out in the first term. That's irrelevant. We're not after it in the first term. We're after it in the second term. Well, we're after it for the third term, really, but we want it promised in the second term. Did I listen to the Shaps interview on Radio 4 the other day? He was pulverised when he criticised the BBC for not referring to the violence as terrorism. He was sharing the Radio 4 rules determined by the Conservatives. Yeah. And see, and I understand where people have got an issue with this BBC thing, because Hamas is officially, because anyone can look at someone committing what is clearly an act of terror and say they're terrorists, like the rest of us would just do that. Hamas is specifically described as a terrorist organisation by the UK government. So people are naturally thinking to themselves, well, what's the deal here? There are sometimes sensible reasons not to. But yeah, as you've just said there, it makes no difference who came up with that guidance, the Conservatives. Brian said, I've worked in Palestine on 5 occasions for various NGOs, and please believe me, until you've seen it at first hand and close up, you can't even begin to understand. I still don't. Precisely, which is why, I mean, I don't get bogged down into details. I simply say my position is this. There are 3 types of people when it comes to something, some catastrophe like this. There are people who will decry one set of murders, and then when you ask them to decry murders on the other side, they either try and justify it or say nothing. There are ones who will do it the other way around. And those are the people who seem to get platformed. Those are the people who are all over the media. All I see all over the mainstream media are the people who are saying, including, do you know what the most baffling thing? There's a Conservative MP, Crispin Blunt. Has anyone seen him? Crispin Blunt this weekend. He was attacking the Israeli response in Gaza, and you think, well, that's interesting, Conservative. But it goes further than that. He justified, I don't know that he specifically justified Hamas's action last week, by the way. I don't know. Don't sue me. I'm not saying that. But he justified Hamas's existence. He said Hamas had legitimate targets in Israel. Well, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It doesn't represent a state. It doesn't represent a people. It is a terrorist organisation funded by Iran, supplied by Iran. Hamas is basically a paramilitary taking part in a proxy war between Iran and America. That is what that is. But it is very messy. And as I say, I'm not going to go on and on and on. I'm doing a video for tomorrow. It may end up being a bit longer than usual because there's other things in it. But it's not going to be one, just to explain my position. When I say I'm not going to do lots and lots of it, it's not me just not wanting to tread on eggshells or something. The way YouTube works is you have to, and I've said this last week when I was talking about social media at that event. You have a target audience in mind. So a lot of you here are particularly interested in that sort of British Westminster politics that I talk about. That's why you're here. Some of you will be interested in this, some of them not so much. You can't be mixing up. You can't. People who try and do a YouTube channel and flit from one thing to the other, because if you do a channel that you're interested in and you cover all of your interests, you will find very few people will watch it. So you have to sort of be disciplined. I have lots of interests, even within politics, but I only every now and then touch on an event if it's really big, or if I can see a link to British politics. So when I did the video last Sunday, wasn't it? It would have been last Sunday. So when I did that video, I was doing it just because it's such a huge thing, and I wanted to have my say on it. When I do the video tomorrow, it won't be for that reason, because I've already had my say on it. I don't need to say anything further. I don't need to say anything further just because Israel has struck back, because it was bleeding obvious that was going to happen. Nothing that's happened this weekend is a surprise to 7 days ago me, or anyone who's been paying attention. We all knew it was coming. The reason why I'm going to talk about it tomorrow is because I'm worried about how it affects Britain, as in British society, because I am a bit worried. Because I think perceptions are... am I talking about Corbyn here refusing to condemn Hamas? Right, he's one of them. I don't know why everyone always makes everything about Corbyn. He's not the only one, is he? He's not the only person who's been specifically asked about it and refused to say anything about the murders last weekend, but all of a sudden is all over condemning the murders this weekend. You know, there's a lot of them. And, you know, but there's also people on the right. There are people on the right who are justifying this weekend's atrocities, but were condemning last weekend's. This isn't about left or right, because left and right politics is about economics. It's got nothing to do with this. You know, this is about bloodthirsty tribalism. And in the middle of it, what you've got is millions and millions of innocent people who are suffering. And both sides suffer. Like, there's no such thing as supporting Palestine or supporting Israel if you don't support the other as well. You can support Israel and Palestine, or neither. It's not possible to support one or the other. And we've seen why in the last week. Because when one side commits atrocities, the other side fires back. And that is why we have this never-ending cycle. But anyway. Walt saying, I heard someone describe the relationship between Hamas and Palestinians as similar to that between the Taliban and Afghans. Is that true? I'm not going to be able to comment on that, but what I will just say is the vast majority of people in any part of the world just want peace. And do you know what? The people in a war-torn part of the world want peace more than anyone. You know, who were the people who most desperately wanted peace in Northern Ireland? People in Northern Ireland. The people in Northern Ireland on both sides wanted that peace. More than we did in Britain. We wanted peace in, you know, over here. They wanted, you know, Americans wanted peace. People in Europe wanted peace. Who wanted it the most? The people actually living with the violence. The people who live with violence appreciate peace the most. So the people who most want peace in Israel and Palestine, it's not people with placards in London. It's people in Israel and Palestine. And, you know, you look at, you know, you think to yourself, if let's think about the condemnation of Benjamin Netanyahu, right? Who's most savagely attacking him? It's the Israeli press. The Israeli press, Israeli politicians, you know, they are blaming him for this. You know, there's no great bloodlust evident within Israel here for revenge. They're blaming all of this is happening because of Benjamin Netanyahu wanted to avoid going to prison. That's why. That's what he's doing here. You know, he's basically Vladimir Putin or Boris Johnson. Except Boris Johnson wouldn't get away with actually invading France, even though the Daily Mail kept egging him on. More generally, what lessons from the Northern Ireland peace process could be applied to the Israeli-Palestine conflict? Simple. Get America to care. How did the Good Friday Agreement had an awful lot of stakeholders all having to you know, very seriously on all sides come together in the spirit of compromise to get peace, right? Who put their shoulder behind it? The United States. Their input was absolutely essential. Absolutely essential. Why doesn't America put its shoulder behind peace and the two-state solution in the Middle East? Because it doesn't care. And that's not a criticism of like politicians particularly. You know, President Biden, I'm going to mention him in my video. He said, I'm going to try and get the quote right. He said, we mustn't lose sight of the fact that the overwhelming majority of Palestinians are nothing to do with Hamas, but they are suffering just as well. That is what he said. Biden knows the situation, but what can he do? Nothing. Like, if you think about what and he's the most powerful man in the world in theory, but what can he do? Nothing. He can't stop this. As people, you know, various commentators who are trying to bring some sense to it are saying, the only way you could stop this is by physically forcing Israel to withdraw. You'd have to launch an army or armed forces into Gaza and force Israeli forces back. America can't order Netanyahu to pull them back. If President Biden was to order economic sanctions against Israel, they wouldn't work. Things like that would take time. Israel has everything it needs right now. Over the long term, if America applied long-term economic sanctions, then yes, that would hurt them. It's just like with Russia. We applied, well, say we, some Western countries applied sanctions against Russia after last year's full-scale invasion. They didn't bite straight away. They're starting to take their toll over this year. They'll bite a bit more next year. They take time to bite. Same with Israel. You can't. So what's he to do? And the thing is, and you think to yourself, well, why don't they do it for the long term, in the interest of long-term peace, right? We can't do anything about the situation now, but for the long term, why don't they apply sanctions to Israel then? There's no political will to. He won't get away with it. Because most people in America are very one-sided on this one. Most people in America are very one-sided on this one. And even if a lot of US politicians, even if a load of Republicans saw the sense in having peace in the Middle East, but ask yourself this. First of all, the perception in America is there on Israel's side that they've taken a side, basically. Whereas they never took a side with Ireland as such. They just wanted peace in Ireland. This was Ireland against Ireland. Effectively, yes, British forces were mucking things up as well. But ultimately, you had two sets of Irish people. Although you're just on the side of Ireland. No one in America, very few people will sort of look at Palestine and Israel as just a messed up place. They just say it is all the fault of the Arabs because America is philosophically opposed to Iran. It's very clearly a proxy war between Iran and America. So America has its side, and that's it. And that's why I see no end to it. I see no end at all. And it can't end until, I don't just lay the blame all at America's feet because I've mentioned Iran enough as well, but America could set up the two-state solution. If you had these clearly defined borders and you had Palestine, and it wouldn't stop maybe incursion. We know Saudi Arabia keeps bombing the crap out of Yemen, for example. So setting up clearly defined international borders doesn't in itself make peace. But if you are, if the attitude is more like, China with North Korea, where you can sort of make them behave themselves and so on, there you go. One angry pagan saying, disappointed that I heard not a lot on education policy at conference. Thoughts? Well, two thoughts. Firstly, I have said before, I'm not a huge supporter of Bridget Phillipson. She may be a very nice person. She may be a brilliant education secretary, but she's a rubbish politician. She's no good at getting herself noticed. But the other thing to note is you don't actually need a lot on education policy. Education is actually really simple to deal with. What you need is, first of all, you need some school buildings. They're always nice, but that's an issue for the Treasury. Obviously, Phillipson isn't going to decide whether, at what rate those school buildings are rebuilt. The next thing you need is decent pay for teachers to attract people into the profession. Again, Phillipson's not, that's the Treasury to come up with. She can't come up with that. The only thing I would expect Phillipson to really be properly working on is Ofsted. Dealing with Ofsted is a mess, and it's always been a mess. It was a mess under Labour. It was a mess under the Conservatives, first of all, then under Labour, then under the Conservatives again, right? But at the same time, it's not the sexiest thing to talk about either, so So I don't read too much in it. I know I come from a teaching background. I'm not that disappointed. There isn't really, when it comes to education, there's not a lot you need to do. You need to make sure you've got the teachers needed to deliver education. You need to be properly resourced, good buildings, good equipment. Yes, it would be lovely to introduce critical thinking, but it's a bit like trying to reintroduce programming. If you haven't got the teachers to deliver it, you're a bit screwed. But it's something they should think about in proper civics lessons. The problem with things like that, I'll tell you exactly what would happen. If the government were to say, right, we're going to have this plan in 2 years' time, we want all schools delivering civics lessons and we want you to cover this, 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 and this. I will tell you how that will go down because I've seen it before and I know exactly how it will go down. You'll get the crappiest teachers to deliver it. That's what will happen. Now, that's not to say that all of the teachers who deliver it will be crap. What I mean is, if you've got, it'll be the ones who are sort of trained to be teachers, but their expertise is not that great. You'll get them to do it because, like, oh, anyone can do it. We're all adults. We all know about this stuff. You can do it. It's like, no. It's a bit like when I was working at an FE college, not a sixth form college. Sixth form colleges are good. An FE college, without trying to diss FE colleges too much. The IT teacher retired. So they needed someone to teach IT just part-time. There was only like one class, right? And they needed, so that, they got me to do it. And do you know why they got me to do it? Do I have qualifications in IT? No, I do not. They got me to do it because when anyone in the office had a problem with Microsoft Office, getting Word or Excel to work, I was the one who would show them how. I was the one who knew how Microsoft Access worked because I used it. That's why I was, and it'll be the same, it'll be sort of the opposite thing with these civics. So you need to make sure that you've got people, they'll need proper training is what I'm saying. They'll actually need to go on courses and, to do like, go on this course, learn to deliver this, and before you do it, rather than just giving someone a pack of stuff, oh, teach them this, will you, on a Wednesday afternoon. But there we go. Uncle Social saying, I do a lot of work with Ofsted. They really know little about anything, a waste of money. Yeah. You need an inspection program. I think the focus is wrong. They keep having this thing about Ofsted driving up standards. No, you don't use inspectors to drive up standards. The government should drive up standards, right? The purpose of the inspectors should be just to check that you're actually doing what you're supposed to be doing, right? The government set guidance. They say, right, we want all schools to do this. This is best practice, right? Do this. The inspectors should just be going around like a foreman, just checking you're doing it. Are you doing it? Yes or no? If it's yes, fine. Don't need a grade. Forget about the grades. If you want a quantitative assessment of that school, and you will, everyone wants that, that's fine. You can give various scores on their exam results, value added, come up with various scores for things like provision for people with special needs or whatever, come up with that. But none of this grading system, none of this, oh, we're driving up standards. No, you're not. You are a barrier to standards. And they're a barrier to standards because I can tell you as a teacher who's worked in FE college, sixth form colleges and schools when Ofsted inspectors have been around, they're not inspecting the school as it's running. You spend months training. Whenever you think your Ofsted window might open up again, you spend months doing after school training on, oh, we've got to get ready for Ofsted. If you have to get ready for an inspection, the inspection's worthless. It should just be inspectors just turning up just to check that you're doing what they're supposed to be doing, what the government's told you to do. Are you doing what the Department of Education expects of you? Yes. If you see some particularly good practice, note it down. Say to the parents, oh, they do this really well, that's good. If you see something that is an area for development, again, tell the principal or the head teacher. Fine. But none of this big song and dance. It's all cobblers. But anyway, we're sort of run out of time. You've got me moaning about school now. I'll read this last one. Film nerd, I'm a data engineer and analyst, and that's what I get from work. I know nothing about Microsoft Windows stuff. I work on software coding like SQL and Python. Completely different, makes me chuckle. But anyway, we'll call it there. Thank you very much for going on, everyone. Have a very good evening, and until next time, I'll see you later.